Thank you, Mr. Dinowitz. So the first thing I wanted to ask about is the Federal Law Enforcement Safety Act and retired members of law enforcement. In this legislation, it requires for those applying for a concealed carry permit to take a 16-hour class and 2 hours of live fire range training courses. So I just wanted to get it on the record, since retired law enforcement officers already took that training, and if they are qualified under Federal Law Enforcement Safety Act, also known as HR 218, they get qualified every year. Would this 16-hour requirement, would they be exempt from that?
They would be, yes.
Can you say that again, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So I just wanted to get that clarified for the record because it doesn't clearly state that in the bill. But the retired law enforcement officers are exempt from this sensitive location, correct? There's a carve out for them? Okay. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about with the sensitive location is what streets will define Times Square?
I believe the city of New York would define that.
So we are deferring to another municipality, the law that is about to be created by the state legislature?
Yes,
Have we ever done that before?
probably.
Can you give me an example of
No.
that?
I can't, but I'm sure we have.
So what if they said that Times Square was the whole island of Manhattan? Would that be okay to the state legislature?
Why would you think they would say that? Times Square is Times Square. Everybody knows Times Square.
Well, do you consider, so is
Well, except
47th,
me, I never leave the Bronx, so I can't give you a good
so
location.
is 47th Street and Broadway considered Times Square?
You know how I would define Times Square, but I'm not the city of New York. I would define Times Square as the place where all the people gather on December 31st. But that's just me. But the city of New York, I'm sure, could come up with a very specific and reasonable definition of what constitutes Times Square.
So, well, that's the crossroads of America, right? Where Broadway and 7th Avenue they come across each other, right? So Times Square, where the ball drops, 42nd Street between 7th and Broadway, right there, right? But Times Square may be defined as 8th Avenue to 6th Avenue, from 36th Street to 47th Street. What are we looking at? Well, we need to be a little more definitive, I think.
I think first they would have to have signs. Secondly, it is the crossroads of the world. Okay, here, I got it. The area commonly known as Times Square, as such area is determined and identified by the city of New York, provided that such area shall be clearly and conspicuously identified with signage, which is what I just mentioned. They have to have signs.
Okay, so if they go, so in your opinion, since you're debating the legislation, if the city determined that Columbus Circle, 59th Street and 8th Avenue, is now Times Square, would that be acceptable?
You know, it's hard to respond to what I would consider, don't take this the wrong way, but a pretty absurd hypothetical. Times Square is Times Square, and it's a very limited area, but it's also perhaps the most densely pedestrian area anywhere in the United States.
And where would you define that most densely populated area? Where would you do that?
I would defer to the city of New York because, as I said, I don't know the answer. I don't go into Manhattan unless I have to.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
And that's the truth.
Is there anything in this legislation that increases the penalties for current laws on the books that violate that for a violation of firearms?
I believe we create two new crimes, and that would be Class E felonies, punishable by 1 to 4 years in jail. I don't know that we change the penalties for current laws.
So those new laws that are being created, right, those statutes that are being created in this legislation, who would be subjected to prosecution in that?
The people who violate those provisions.
And what would that violation consist of?
The violation would consist of, here we are, criminal possession of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun in a sensitive location. So if they violated the provision with respect to sensitive locations, they could be prosecuted for that.
Is there? I'm sorry.
And they would be subject to conviction of a Class E felony punishable by 1 to 4 years in prison.
What is one of the criteria of that committing a crime that would violate that statute?
A person is guilty, and I'm looking at my notes here. A person is guilty of criminal possession of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun in a sensitive location when such person possesses a firearm, rifle, or shotgun in or upon a sensitive location, and such person knows or reasonably should have known such location is a sensitive location. That's on page 8 of the bill, if you check the bill.
Okay.
And that's one of the two crimes. And there's a second crime similar regarding criminal possession in a restricted location.
Okay, that's right. So is any of the criteria that the person has to be a concealed carry permit holder?
Has to be a what?
A concealed carry permit holder?
No. Either they violated this provision. Then the second provision is on page 10 of the bill when we're talking about restricted locations. Unless they're exempted, then they can be held responsible if they knew or should have known that they were in a sensitive location or that they were in a restricted location.
Okay. So if someone has an illegal firearm and they're in Times Square, would they be charged with the Class E felony?
If they're not exempted, yes, they could be.
Okay. Okay. So do you know of any other statutes that they may be charged with if they have a loaded firearm in Times Square?
I'm sorry, say it again, please.
Do you know any other statutes they may be charged with if they had a loaded firearm in Times Square defined by New York City?
You're not supposed to possess a firearm in and of itself if it's illegal. So
that person would be arrested for what, a Class C violent felony, illegally possessing a criminal possession of a firearm?
They could be arrested for 2 crimes. Happens all the time.
Okay. So the Class E felony that you describe in this legislation, that's specifically targeting concealed carry permit holders, correct? Because the statute doesn't exist presently.
No.
No?
It relates. It includes people. If you come into Times Square, say with a shotgun, that's not a. I mean, there are other things encompassed in this besides what you just mentioned.
So the current laws wouldn't cover the crime of having an illegal firearm in Times Square?
Well,
right. We don't need. So in other words, we don't need the Class E felony.
Well,
we already have a Class C, Class D.
Isn't your side of the aisle the ones that want more penalties? Well, here's more penalties.
You know that you hit a very interesting point there. Do we cover 16 and 17-year-olds that carry an illegal firearm? Do we make them go to criminal court to be held accountable, or is that not included in this legislation?
I don't know if that's relevant to this particular bill, but what we're creating are 2 new crimes, which one of which, because you probably can't do both at the same time, one of which somebody could be charged with in addition to any other potential crime that they may otherwise be charged with.
So, but the reason why this bill is being introduced is because it's strictly being introduced because of the changes by the Supreme Court of the United States in regards to concealed carry permits, correct?
Well, the Supreme Court, as I said, pretty much invited us to make these changes.
I invited the legislature numerous times to make changes to increase penalties for gun violence all across our city and our state, and it doesn't happen. So
when the Supreme Court invites, we try to accept. Now, I'm just reading: a criminal possession of a weapon in the 2nd degree. A person is guilty of criminal possession of a weapon in the 2nd degree when, with intent to use the same unlawfully against another, such person possesses a machine gun, a loaded firearm, a disguised gun. Such person possesses 5 or more firearms. Such person possesses any loaded firearm, and it goes on. But I think you get the point. There are, people can be. It's like, I mean, maybe this is not a good comparison, but if you're driving a car and an officer stops you, as you well know, often the officer will give out more than one summons because there could be more than one violation that you can be charged with. And the same thing would be true here. There could be different crimes that you can be charged with.
Yeah, no, I understand that. There's lesser included offenses that get charged. I understand that. So let's shift a little gears here. Do you know how many shooting incidents there were in New York City year to date?
No, I do not. I know that It went up significantly once after the advent of the pandemic. I believe, I could be wrong, I believe the number is actually down this year compared to last year, but last year was pretty bad.
So I'm going to give you a few stats on this and then follow up with a question. 634 people have been shot in New York City. Right, the shooting, 634 shooting incidents.
This year?
758 people have been shot. Right, multiple people in the same incident. How many arrests? 2,388 for the possession of an illegal firearm. 1,799 incidents. So you may have an illegal gun in a car, multiple occupants, they get arrested. Guns recovered, 2,063. Do you know how many of those were concealed carry permit holders that either committed the shooting, were arrested for possession of the firearm, or their guns were recovered?
I would imagine the number is very low.
It is.
Of the total, but I will say this: the the amount of guns that we have in this state is largely due to guns coming in from other states. And because the Congress is so split down the middle, the federal government hasn't done much about it. Even with new laws that were passed, that's not going to, in my opinion, resolve the problem. Until there's action, not only on the state level, but on the federal level as well, we're going to still have this issue. Because it really does have to be dealt with federally. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do what we can here on the state level. And keep in mind, the reason we're doing this is because of the plaintiff in the lawsuit who brought the lawsuit, who didn't have to bring the lawsuit, but was successful in the lawsuit and got a 6-3 ruling by the Supreme Court on it. So thanks to them, we're doing this. So
Okay,
you're welcome.
So we're doing it thanks to them. I get it. So listen, I know you stated that we want to be tough on crime, right? We want to make sure that, we hold those accountable, especially those that use a firearm. So in Bronx County, right? Do you know what the average sentence that's issued for someone that's convicted of an illegal firearm?
I don't know the answer to that, but I will say that the question has zero to do with the bill, because the bill has to do with a very narrow subject, which is to address the issue raised by the ruling in the Bruin case in the Supreme Court.
But we're actually, it does, because we're talking about gun crimes, right? And we're talking about making sure that we have laws in place and we give enough resources to our police officers, to our district attorneys, right? So there are gun laws on the books already. So to answer that question, the average sentence by the Bronx DA and the criminal justice system is 5 months for an illegal firearm. 5 months. So there are enough laws on the books that we can hold people accountable, don't you think?
I'm not this. I believe in funding the DAs and the police. I'm not from the cut $1 billion off the police crowd. But this legislation is dealing with concealed carry permits. That's the subject of the legislation, or of the bulk of the legislation. And that's what we're trying to address here. And I will say this: I don't want somebody coming into my apartment with a gun. I don't want somebody in a park with a gun. I don't want somebody in the school and all these other places that are listed here if they're not exempt. And this attempts to address one small part of a problem that we have, and and we're addressing it because a law that was over 100 years old, that was in effect through Republican and Democratic administrations alike, served us as well as it could for all these years, but it was challenged. And the challenge was successful given the new alignment on the Supreme Court. And so as a result, here we are trying to react to it. I believe that what we're doing properly reacts to it. I believe, I'm not a judge, but I believe it's constitutional and it will be upheld if ever challenged. Time will tell.
All right. Mr. Speaker, on the bill, please.
On the bill?
So, in essence, the Supreme Court of the United States said that New York had a two-tiered system. We talk about equality in this room, in this chamber, across the hall, ad nauseum.
That's when, like, old boys
Equality, equity, being fair. So someone that had the means and the resources
And there's no bullets.
to apply for a gun permit, they got it. Maybe they did a bank drop. They owned a business. They had to drop $15,000 in cash each night. They got that permit. But the electrician who belongs to the union, who just wants to defend their family because maybe they live in a high crime area, they can't get that carry permit. Equity, equity, equity. We hear about it every day. We talk about it here. That's all this did. It took away a two-tiered system and it created equity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.